For the past 14 years, Mae has been researching the facts behind political assassinations and abuses of power in this country. Her program relates the news of the week to political conspiracies. Dialogue Conspiracy originates with KLRB-FM in Carmel, California. And now, Mae Brussell.
Good afternoon. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. It's August the 15th, 1977, and it's Dialogue Conspiracy number 282. I'm going to talk today and next week a two-part series on mind control, the American assassins again, a theme that I have gone over and over, different parts of it on Dialogue Conspiracy over the years. But a classical case is the emergence of the Son of Sam. And I want to go into some of the history of the study of violence in California. I believe that Son of Sam is a product of moving that school that was supposed to be at UCLA in 1973 to South Korea and also in the Philippines. There was a school for turning these monsters out and bringing them home to America for these violences, and I'll go into the reasons I believe that this is the case. I think Son of Sam is a good name. I think he's the son of Uncle Sam. He is a new breed of American killers that we've seen on the scene since the creation of the Charles Manson family. I believe the violence that we're seeing in America, this type of violence, is a combination of CIA and military science. I believe that these killers are without motives because they didn't start out as killers, created in the nursery and their school environment to be killers. They had alternating personalities. They changed at some point drastically. It all began with the chemicals. You've been hearing stories that have all of a sudden been suppressed. They came out and then suppressed. The CIA spent $26 million on LSD experiments at 54 institutions, and yet no journalist is asking where did the money go. We have the names of 5 institutions it went to, and one of them was to Dr. Jolly West at UCLA, and I want to go into that at length either this week or next week if I have time. But we have not examined the recipients of this $26 million test, and the point is that after the tests are over, then the people that have been used are put out to do their thing, and for the purposes of spreading their violence and bringing on a police force, and the news media eats it up. It becomes synchronized into a very serious operation that has to be watched because it will be growing. I wrote in the Realist, the very first article I ever published after 9 years research, the one called Why Was Martha Mitchell Kidnapped? It was a 3-part article, and the second part that went along with the Watergate story was called The American Assassins Are Mutations. And Paul Krasner changed the word, are not mutations. That's about the only word he changed when he published the article. And I sincerely meant that the assassins used in America are mutations. I looked up in my dictionary again for the program today, although I had done it a long time ago, the large Random House dictionary. A mutant is by definition, is somebody undergoing or the result of mutation. And mutation is the act or the process of change or altering in form, the qualities or the nature. A sudden departure from a parent type, as when an individual from its parents, caused by a change in a gene or chromosome. Well, when the Random House Dictionary came out, that large one, which was about 6 or 7 years ago, it didn't include the mutations that take place through the scientific laboratories, the medical institutes, and the organizations that are being given the CIA money, our tax money, for mutations. We can now change and make a sudden departure from a certain kind of personality, from what he was when he was growing up, to become the other person that does all the violences. You saw that with Charles Watson at the time of the murders of Sharon Tate, an ordinary, quiet schoolboy, Boy Scout, churchgoer, the pillar of community when he was young, has a changed personality and is able to stab and mutilate and kill 7 people for no apparent reason. To mutate is to change or alter, and this is what is happening. Persons in this country are going through a mutation. And to mutilate is to disfigure and make imperfect by removing or irreparable damaging parts. We are mutilating minds, definitely mutilating minds and disfiguring them and removing part of the brain, and this is an important thing that is happening today. In the article on the American assassins, I'll just read you a couple of sentences because what I wrote there applies for all future murders, all future assassinations, and what I call the CIA crimes. I said the American assassin is a different variety than history ever produced before. This mongrel is not a pure-breed Nazi, but the deformed and hideous baby produced from the marriage of Nazi General Reinhard Gehlen and his mistress Allen Dulles, who formed the CIA. It has taken a long time to recognize just what is different about this creation whose birth followed a quickie ceremony immediately after World War II. The parents of these mutations who helped finance Adolf Hitler's ascendancy and the agencies who long for revenge and war against mankind changed their domicile after World War II instead of being on the continent of Europe. But they didn't change their habits. They moved their nursery to produce new babies from Germany into the United States and into Jamaica. And you see these studies, I'll interject here, I wrote this in 1972, but in 1977 you see that the CIA did move into the United States, and they are using many German Nazi doctors in our laboratories to have done this $25 million research on LSD alone. I said, if other parts of the world have their elaborate plots, none of them equal our murders or attempted murders or accidents or the masterminds behind them. Our American assassins are hired as decoys. Then they are either killed or they are isolated in their cages. That's the way Sam is now for 30 days separated from every person in the prison. The lone assassin then becomes like an animal, and he's dissected by the Pentagon social scientists and psychiatrists. I'm going to read you some sentences of the head psychologist of New York City Police Department in the case of Sam. I said that selected attorneys and privileged biographers then write their histories, and soon the puppet media, the puppet mass media, and other experts begin to pick up the lingo, and they pass along misinformation about these people as facts. And while this human being is being turned into a patsy who is monitored every second and isolated until his death, a group of covert agents manufacture what are supposed to have been his motives for becoming the assassin. The fictitious personality will be studied and is supposed to become the model of assassins that America has produced in the 60s and 70s. There is a set pattern of personality traits to describe these people. The biographical profile can be used for future murders if other candidates threaten the occupant in the White House. Well, this article is a long one. Someday I may just read it on the air to refresh your memory if you don't remember the article, The American Assassins Are Mutations. But what I was trying to say in 1972 is what is taking place today in a very diabolical form. Along with the idea of assassins, to show you just how far they've come along with this process, knowing that certain individuals are selected as patsies and the true murderers get off free or are concealed, and the law enforcement and the military behind them are concealed. There was an article in the San Francisco Chronicle Sunday, August the 14th, 1977, called The Nightmare World, the Church, the Nightmare World Church. And you might want to look that up at your libraries if you have the microfilm copies of the newspapers there. It's about a minister in California who just skipped down to Guyana with his $1 million missionary. His name is Jim Jones, and he's tied to a lot of politicians in California. And he's been the father to thousands of people in his church. He's acquired 25 pieces of property in Ukiah, that's in California. And in Mendocino, he has more than $1.5 million in California and $1 million in a Guyana mission. Those of you who heard Dialogue Conspiracy last week know how I talked about the right-wing church funding missionaries in Mexico, where assassins were trained. And it could be that that school for missionaries in Oaxaca, Mexico, is closed up. And now the Guyana mission would be a place for assassins to run. And the reason I say that is that one of the things that Jim Jones does as a minister is to get the members of the congregation to sign confessions that they were part of a crime, and they signed these papers saying that they committed crimes, and they had blank sheets of paper as members of the church, and there are thousands of members of the church that could be used by the temple in any way they wanted. They were asked to just sign their name to blank sheets of paper. Then they were asked to sign confessions to crimes, which included molesting their own children, but they were to sign confessions that they conspired to kill the president or overthrow the government. An example is a woman who works at a radio station, makes $1,000 a month. She lives on a commune run by Jim Jones and his church, and she gets $2 a week for spending money and buys clothes, used clothes at a rag shop, and goes back and sleeps at the commune and lives there and gives her entire paycheck to this church. And there's people there that have been there for quite a few years now. He takes all of their money. They either live with him on the premise or off the premise, and they spy on each other and turn on information from each other. And they have a joint communal punishment where the priest gets up on the podium and calls their names, and people get up to 300 beatings, children 4 years of age up to 50 years of age, with a board. A 200-pound woman beats them, and a microphone is put at their mouth to hear them scream, so that everyone in the congregation hears the screams. This is like Nazi Germany. I really have thought seriously that the very first book I write will be titled Without Armbands or Marching. I don't think the story of this country has really been told or put together yet by enough people. I try to do it and take all these newspapers and pick up these items. But can you imagine a family being called up and accusing members of their family when the name is called out? A member of the family takes them up to the podium and they all yell at them and call them names. And Jones yells, "Hit them harder," and they're whipped. And among the other things, the deprivation and the pain and the humiliation and poverty, which they stand, they have to stay there. They can't leave because they stand to lose everything. It's all invested in the church. They have to sign papers that they conspired to kill the President of the United States. Now, Son of Sam has not gone into political assassinations, but as soon as he was arrested, there were 2 more killings of people sitting in a car in New York. The killings haven't stopped. There's a lot of Sams. There's one in Seaside, California, just a few miles from where KLRB is, where 4 people were killed. And we were told by the police chief that absolutely no maniac did the crime. That was on the news here in Carmel today. They don't have a suspect, but they're assuring us that there's no maniac killing 4 people. Imagine a grandmother and a mother and 2 daughters slit and stabbed to death many, many times with blood all over the house. A nice church-going, quiet woman, one who works in the park system, another the grandmother visiting, decent family in a home that 4 can't get out of. For some reason, they're submissive, and there doesn't seem anything that's taken from the house. And the police chief tells us there absolutely is no maniac. We're supposed to believe the other side of the coin is that it's a perfectly normal killing. If there's no maniac involved and no deranged person, this was the quotation on the news today, no deranged person did this, then it's become perfectly normal to go in and take a mother, a grandmother, and 2 children and stab them to death, cut them up in as many as pieces as you want with blood all over the place, and walk out and tell the community that there's no deranged person. It's about as sane as the Gestapo or the Night of Glass in Germany, where Hitler unleashed his people and they went out into the streets and broke everything in the homes and shattered them and cut people up. And I'm sure that Adolf Hitler would tell the media there's no deranged Nazis. And that's what you're seeing in America when the media tells you that we're perfectly safe, that this was a sane kind of way to die. Well, the Son of Sam covers the same pattern as all the American assassinations, and that's why I read you about the American assassin. He's just a little test tube baby out on the streets. And I've broken the story so far this week into these subjects that we'll go into. The police knew in advance and could have had Sam on June 26th, and yet allowed the murder of Stacy Moskowitz and the blinding of her date. Sam was supposed to have been seen with a companion. I learned that from a friend today who was listening to KGO radio, that in Westchester County he was seen with a companion, which is similar to Lee Harvey Oswald and Arthur Bremer and James Earl Ray. They all had friends, Sirhan. They weren't alone. Somebody was pulling the strings, and it probably is that Sam indeed has companions. It wasn't alone. There are telltale letters around and diaries, evidence left in an open car, which is totally impossible. Letters to the police confirming he's the murderer, sitting on a car after he got a ticket on the fire hydrant. He goes to his apartment and leaves a machine gun and letters in a car. It's impossible. And we'll go into the weapons. No story yet of how he purchased all his ammunition and the contradictions in the weapons stories. And of course, Sam worked for the police department and got his training, his LSD treatment and personality change in the government. In comes the mysterious court-appointed attorney that always takes over the case and is right away way to make a buck and sell the tapes and confirm that Sam is the guilty one, even though we're not sure who did do all these killings. He's going into details about the killings, but the attorney is mysterious. And there's a double for Sam, too. And just like in all the other conspiracy stories, a man that was taken off in handcuffs to the police department and was a double. And then, of course, the telephone hypnosis possibility and the wonderful capture in the movie rights, the book rights. It sounds just like all the other assassinations or murders or scripts, whether it's the Chowchilla story, the Manson story, the killing of Dr. Oda in California, the zebra killings, you name it. The violence pattern that's been set up for terrorism in this country has a set pattern, and if you fill in and change the names and the dates, you can solve these stories very quickly. As far as the police knowing in advance, or the collusion in this matter, I read the Salt Lake Tribune and the San Jose Mercury. They both had articles that an airline stewardess had a passenger with her on June 26th, and he introduced himself to her. They were going down to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and he told the airline stewardess that he was the son of Sam. At that point, 5 or 6 people had been killed, but they didn't have this July killing. This was June 26th. So the FBI and the police sent pictures or composites of Sam to 50 states. When the family was coming north to New York from Florida to see Sam after he was arrested, David Berkowitz is his name, a neighbor, Ted Rosen of the family, gave an interview to the newspaper, and he said he had seen David Berkowitz 3 months ago on a visit, and he said June 26th, their son, the Berkowitz's son, had spent most of his visit going to Fort Lauderdale Beach. He had been at Miami and been there. So these last murders, the murder and the blinding, could have been avoided because when he told her on the airplane that he was son of Sam, all they had to do is get the passenger list, and the same person using the same name returned from Fort Lauderdale and went back to New York, and those murders could have been avoided. But that isn't a pattern that's alone or unique. The Manson family massacres could have been avoided. I met a sheriff in Los Angeles who was on Dialogue Conspiracy with me a couple of years ago, who was in on the arrest of Charles Manson when they finally decided to go in after the killings of Sharon Tate and the LaBianca family. And he said the sheriffs all along knew that there were people around there with weapons and practicing, and stories of murders and drugs and girls under 18 years of age and man on parole. And there were orders, don't touch the Manson family, because he knew they were getting ready for a kill. The only difference was that he was a white Christian and they were going to kill Black Panthers. And the sheriff's office was waiting for a kill and knew it, and all that could have been avoided if anyone spoke up. And then Joseph Romero and Russell Little were in Oakland and arrested January the 10th, 1974. And a house was burned down where Nancy Ling Perry lived and the SLA lived, and there was writing all over the house and walls and books, and a post office helmet of William Harris. Again, he worked at the post office like David Berkowitz. And there were the names and addresses, the names of William and Emily Harris and Angela and Gary Atwood and other members of the house that were burned down, the SLA house. And Colson Westbrook of the CIA, who worked 7 years with mind control and behavior modification, who worked in prison with Donald DeFreeze at Vacaville, produced pictures later of the Harrises visiting, and Joseph Romero and Russell Little visiting Donald DeFreeze at Vacaville prison. He had all the pictures of the friends and members of the SLA that worked with Joseph Romero and Russell Little, and as the police had rounded those people up between January the 10th and February the 4th, there would be no kidnapping of Patty Hearst. It's just like the killings in New York City, the last big splash of David Berkowitz there. But this is a pattern that I've seen, and maybe some of you, if you study these other violences, would find that there was foreknowledge in those cases. They could have checked the post office job of William Harris, the job that Emily Harris had, or any one of those 7 or 8 members of the SLA, and rounded them up in Berkeley. They had cars, they had car licenses, they had jobs, identified them and looked for them, and solved that problem earlier before Patty was kidnapped. Now, Sam Carr is the man who lived 1 story below David Berkowitz. And David claims that Sam directed him, that he took orders from him. Sam had the window just below him. He's the one who had the dog that was shot in the leg by David, but David might have shot the dog out of anger. Sam owned a telephone answering service, and I think that's interesting, and it should be checked out. And I will be sending a tape of Dialogue Conspiracy today, and next week, Two Sides to the Moskowitz family back there, because I think they should sue the police for not checking the January 25th lead or 26th lead anyway. But Sam has an answering service, and if you read the book, The Control of Candy Jones, which is so important, Candy got all her instructions on the telephone, and Sam was a messenger. He's the man that David Berkowitz said controlled him, who gave him his orders. That he says, you send me out at night, I may do the killings, but you control me. This is what he wrote and said, send the letters, you're the man who controls me. So it's very interesting that a man who has a telephone service who agonizes David so much that he shoots this dog. Maybe he wanted to actually shoot Sam because Sam was sending him. And he blamed Sam, even when the dog was shot in the leg. He didn't use the dog's name, whatever it is. He didn't say Fido controls him. In the Omen, the script for this thing, it could be a dog tells a person to go out and do the murders. But the point is that Sam is the one giving the murders. He only shot the dog, and the dog didn't have a name. Sam Carr is the man who lives below, who is the answering service. And Sam Carr also told the police 3 weeks before the last killing that he thought David might be the one. And it may be that 3 weeks ago they were going to end this charade and wind it up just like the Patty Hearst kidnapping, which I said 3 weeks to the day of evidence that they knew where she was, she would be pulled in, and it happened that way. And again, you get this similarity of people controlling the strings. 3 weeks to the day before the last killing, Sam Carr told the police, I think David might have the .44 caliber rifle. And the police went through their files and didn't confirm this phone call or not. This would be a piece of evidence that's missing or on the police logs, but he told them that he believed that the man upstairs from him was the person, and yet they had 3 weeks there and didn't do anything about that. Was Sam a loner? I don't know. As I said before, it was somebody told me that on KGO today they said that he was at Westchester County with another person, and I know there's a double that was picked up right in Midtown New York and taken to the police station out in the precinct, and not in the Midtown, taken away in handcuffs. And they asked him his profession, and he said he was an artist. And they said, oh, we've got the right one, because the son of Sam had an artist kind of script. And he says, no, I'm an actor. And they said, oh, that's why you're Sam, because we think he wore wigs. And they took this man off because he fit the composite picture. But whether or not he knew him or worked as a double, I don't know. Time will tell who his companions are. But the man that they took off at the double was a Puerto Rican. And in the case of Sirhan and these other gentlemen, they were with swarthy men that appeared to be anti-Castro Cubans or could be Puerto Ricans. But in this case, the double was supposed to be a Puerto Rican. Now, the CIA comes out with their profiles, and this is the part that I wrote about in 1972, and this is what I can apply to the present time. This is taken, from the New York Post, New York paper. It says, police were pleased about the psychological profile they had developed during the manhunt. The profiles were especially good. They were pretty accurate. Sam was a loner. Harry Schlossberg is the director of the Psychological Services, New York City Police. And it would be really nice to know if any of that LSD money, or $25 million from the CIA, went to Harvey Schlossberg. Because remember when Dr. Olson took LSD in New York, in Washington, D.C., as part of the experiment, and he began to go crazy and lose his mind, they didn't send him to a doctor in Washington. They sent him to a doctor in New York City, Dr. Abramson at Mount Sinai Hospital, who just came out to be a CIA doctor in the revelations of the Washington Post and New York Times in the last 2 weeks. In the list of the CIA institutions, they used a doctor from Mount Sinai Hospital to see this person. And it would be wonderful to know if Harvey Schlossberg, the director of Psychological Services, is part of that CIA team. He says it was so good and accurate because David Berkowitz was a loner. Well, every agent that works for the CIA doing this kind of work stays alone. Read Candy Jones' book, where she was an extrovert. She was told to hate all blacks and not see them, to stay away from all Jews and not see them, to stay away from Italians because they smelled of garlic. She was told she couldn't go to a dentist, even if her teeth rotted. Even Howard Hughes couldn't see a dentist for 20 years. She couldn't go to a doctor. Howard Hughes couldn't go to anybody except the doctors that were sent by his guards to him. And if David Berkowitz didn't go out, what makes him different than all these other agents? She couldn't see anybody. She stayed alone inside the house, and all agents are loners. So there isn't anything great by the psychological services of New York police saying he was a loner. And then he said he was not red-eyed or foaming at the mouth. Well, neither was James Earl Ray or Sirhan Sirhan or Lee Harvey Oswald or Jack Ruby or Candy Jones. Candy Jones was taken to Taiwan where she was tortured. She was taken to the CIA offices in Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C., where they put her on a table and put carrots in her vagina and did demonstrations and undressed her in front of men, the head of the CIA. You have to read this book to see what they did to her. And she didn't blink an eyelash. A woman that's prim and proper actually had physical experimentations done upon her and comes out smiling and doesn't hate those people. And she's on New York radio 5 nights a week and talks about her book and barely goes into the things that she wrote about what they did to her in the way of torture to her hands and her body and her vagina. And she wasn't red-eyed or foaming at the mouth. She was a model for Conover. She was a sweet housewife with 2 children who was given a double personality and sent out to see people like Jimmy Hoffa and told to kill herself, just like this David Berkowitz was going to have his big slam before he got himself done in and wanted to die. He said he was going to have his big killing and then die, like a kamikaze thing. These assassins aren't red-eyed or foaming. They're trained not to be. That's the purpose of 26 years of work and $26 million, is to keep them cool, keep them in your community. Take your sons and husbands and daughters and turn them into killers, and that's what they're doing. And they look like everybody else except they're time bombs, and they're going to explode, and they're exploding in every city in America until you really will be able to see the pattern if you pinpoint what doctors they saw. Now, this doctor in New York City, the director of the psychological services, said that their assassin, they figured out before they caught him he wouldn't stand out in any way, that he wasn't conspicuous. None of these people were. The SLA people that picked up Patty Hearst, she's living with her boyfriend in Berkeley and taken in the middle of the night screaming, half naked. One works in an ecology place at a park in Berkeley, Camilla Hall. One works at the Transamerica building. Angela Atwood waiting tables in San Francisco. Emily Harris worked at a polling office in Berkeley. We never found out what that was. I think that was a CIA front. It's never been exposed or even revealed for what it was. And William Harris worked at as a post office. And what did they do? They took this woman out of her home and put her in a closet and gave her acid, and her mind was distorted. She talked about the visions and the things she saw and locked her up for 45 days and read her harrowing tales and clanked machine guns in her ears. And when she came out of the closet, 7 days later, she's raiding the Hibernia Bank, and she becomes a notorious criminal. None of these people stood out in any way. They were part of the Berkeley community. Angela Hall and Ms. Moon, and, they didn't look like somebody who could take somebody out of their home and disrupt their lives and ruin the spirit of their families who live in fear of death all the time now. These people don't stand out in any ways. And then this great profile in New York City, the expert said neighbors thought he was a nice boy who kept to himself. Well, Candy was a nice woman and kept to herself. And they tell her to jump off of a place out of Paradise Island and crack her head open and die. They have a profile they've used in every one of these stories, every one of these conspiracies you can compare to the last. They say he was in a job that was not well-paying job, which didn't give him gratification. The CIA hasn't yet taken any bank presidents and turn them into assassins. Not yet. They may. They take people that are losers or people that are easily given to hypnosis or people that are brought into this country as a citizenship, like the anti-Castro Cubans or the White Russians or Palestinians, because they want their home brought back to them. They want the communists out. They can be told the country's going to the dogs. You can take a man in Chicago whose father was in Auschwitz and turn him into a Nazi to embarrass his father and lead the Nazi party being a Jew. Or you can take this Berkowitz man and turn him into a monster, a Jesus freak, and then a killer, wants to be a mass killer. His father owned a hardware store and was retired. And David Berkowitz didn't have a well-paying job, but they don't tell you where he bought that car. He had a pretty new Ford there. It wasn't a Volkswagen bus or bug. It looked like he had a pretty nice car, and they don't tell you how he paid his rent. I think for 1 or 2 years in advance he had put up a big amount for the rent, and he went to Houston Texas. He traveled and visited a friend. It's true he lived in one room, but so did Lee Harvey Oswald and Arthur Bramer. And all of these people, they were stalked and kept in one room and went out at night. But that was the pattern the CIA set up for one, and it set up for all. The New York psychologist said they hadn't caught some of Sam, and they were predicting that he would be sort of separate and couldn't relate to the world. They're ordered to be separate. This is just hogwash. They're drugged, they're hypnotized, they're given sodium pentothal, they're told to be suspicious. Candy Jones was told, be suspicious of everybody, don't see anybody, stay separate. What would keep Lee Harvey Oswald in his room all day for 4 months and then go out to see anti-Castro Cubans at night and never be seen, at parks, or take his wife or his child to restaurants? And agents that have lived in Carmel Valley that I've known, they stay separate. They don't take their families out. They're not part of the community or the PTA or anything going on here. They lead separate lives so they won't be identified later. The profile put out by the New York City police on the kind of person that would be picked up, and they're patting themselves on the back as being a great job. They said they were so pleased that they developed this profile during the manhunt, and yet it came right out of Langley, Virginia. It was in Virginia, not Maryland, where Candy Jones was taken for these experiments. And of course, Lee Harvey Oswald, who never had a diary, whose original diary has yet never been found. And Sirhan said he didn't write his diary, and Arthur Bremer's diary is insane. All of these alleged assassins left diaries. What did David Berkowitz leave? He got his car parked at the time that the Moskowitz murder, and he got a ticket at the fire hydrant, so his car had been marked. But then afterwards, a few weeks later, he goes to his apartment. It's on the 7th floor in New York City. He parks his car on the street, and he leaves the door open, which is practically never done in New York City or San Francisco or L.A. because people rip parts out of the cars. And it's almost impossible that David Berkowitz, at that moment, left his door open, and along comes a detective, Ed Zigo and John Longo, and they open the car door. Miracle of miracles, a .45 caliber submachine gun is on the seat of the car. Another miracle, as luck would have it, a note was on the seat for whoever wanted to see it. And this was a 4-page letter. This wasn't any ordinary note, and it was found on the seat of his car, addressed to the Suffolk County Police Department, Long Island. The police printed in the same handwriting used in the previous communications. It warned of impending attacks, and it signed Son of Sam. Wasn't that nice of Sam to leave his gun and his letters open? He didn't even lock them up or take them in. Where did he get his gun? He bought it in Houston, Texas. He bought the gun, the .44, in Houston. He has a friend there who works for a security system. Another link to the police, the security system. The SLA was full of them. Everybody's friend was a guard or security person. They asked him, "What, did you buy the gun in your name?" He says, "Oh, no, do you think I'm crazy?" He didn't want to be identified. He had a friend buy the gun, and he got it from the friend. He went all the way to Houston, Texas. Isn't it strange that these violences, this syndrome, are coming from California, Houston, and Florida? Those are the big pits of mind control. They may send assassins out all over the country, but this is where it's really getting down to perfecting the techniques. And I wonder about his trip to Fort Lauderdale, Florida in June, before he did the last murder. But he said, "Do you think I'm crazy to buy a gun and walk in myself and buy it?" I had a friend buy it. But yet, he ordered a mail-order rifle that he's going to be doing some shooting with, and on the outside it says rifle. So in New York City, he can obtain rifles. He can go to Sears Roebuck or any store, hunting store, and buy a rifle. And he did buy a rifle by mail order, therefore he didn't mind being identified there. So he didn't have to go all the way to Houston to buy the other gun. If he's going to buy one, he can buy the other. So buying the gun in Houston has another story. I don't know why he went that far, but it may have been part of the programming. Something happens in Houston, Texas, and it was after he got home from Houston that 3 weeks later, he sat on it and started his first killing. Now, there hasn't been any mention about the ammunition. He was going to kill 50 to 150 people at the discotheque this summer. He had 180 rounds of ammunition. There isn't a word about any of these assassins where they bought their ammunition. Lee Harvey Oswald or James Earl Ray or Sirhan, they got their weapons, but it's always a secret who supplied the ammunition, who knew them, or who saw them. Now, this David has a friend who's a security officer in Mackinac, Michigan, at the Michigan College at Mackinac. And he was interviewed, and Paul Willow, and he said how Sam worked, I call him Sam, it's David Berkowitz, worked for the federal government as a post office clerk, and later that was confirmed that he was. Sarah Jane Moore worked with alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. She was with the agents about getting rifles the morning that she came back and took a shot at Gerald Ford. She worked with the FBI as an informant for the Feed the Poor program at the time of the Hearst kidnapping. She was an informer that spread rumors about Popeye Jackson, who was later killed, president of the United Prisoners Union. Sarah Jane Moore worked for the government. Willie Wolfe worked for the government. David Berkowitz worked for the government. And before he worked for the government, he worked in the police department as a police auxiliary, and he was a former security guard, and he guarded for surveillance for just the kind of crimes that were coming down. One of his jobs was to be a guard. The attorney who's on the case, Mr. Philip Peltz, came right in and was beginning to offer the sale of tapes. You remember how quickly Patty Hearst was taped the minute she was in the cell, and they didn't sell those tapes, but they certainly broadcast them, and people made money in the newspaper business about the tapes of Patty Hearst talking to her friend. And I think that it's important to know that somebody gets right in and bugs these people and is able to commercialize or use it for the jury later or the trials, and shouldn't be allowed in the jail at all. This Mr. Philip Peltz is a beauty. The attorney that ran in to take care of me, he already was convicted of 4 felony counts, a stock fraud case, and he was in the federal penitentiary. He was convicted of supplying the services of a prostitute to an official of the Security Exchange Commission. And in return, the officials gave Peltz information about security exchange investigations, and he used the information for further illegal manipulations. That brings in Donald DeFreeze, who ran a house of prostitution in Compton in Los Angeles when he worked for the criminal conspiracy section of the Los Angeles Police Department. It was miles from where he was killed, between the airport and the house where DeFreeze was to be killed by the LAPD. And he supplied black women for men that worked at the Customs Department at the LA airport. And I wonder what slipped by the customs, like narcotics or whatever, that the customs men were fixed with their goodies, and that was his job. So the attorney, Peltz, was supplying the services of prostitutes for the Security Exchange Commission, and Donald DeFreeze was doing the same thing in California. Nobody yet can find out how Peltz got into the case. He wouldn't say. It's a big mystery, and it's always a mystery in these assassinations, how these particular attorneys get into the cases, who calls them in the first place. These assassination attorneys have their own techniques of keeping the evidence out and bringing in people, the witnesses that hide the truth but convict the person. The person, their client, always gets convicted, and the truth is concealed, and these attorneys are geniuses. I think the complications of the way Melvin Belli got into the Jack Ruby case, and I think I'll go on with the story of Sam now and maybe discuss that with you sometime, just do a show on how the attorneys get into these cases. Now, Sam's case, or David Berkowitz's case, if you read the papers, is a clear-cut case of being programmed. I mean, that is so obvious. He says, I was out to kill. It was my job to kill. Sam told me to do it. Sam sent me on the assignments. I had to do what I had to do. I had to take orders when he sent me. Sam was a white male, he says. Now, this story about getting orders through Carr's dog are really interesting, because he says he got it through his dog. I got the messages through his dog. But it was Sam who really, he said it was through Sam Carr's dog. He's really a man who lived 6,000 years. Now that little sentence there takes all the attention away from David Berkowitz and what happened in these mind control schools in South Korea. That just makes him look so ridiculous that he'll never have to stand a trial. And like DeSapio at the time of the Boston Strangler case, he never went to trial. And there wasn't enough proof that he did the stranglings, and he never went to trial. Well, in this case, if he says Sam lived 6,000 years ago, then you say, you can't even hate the man. Mr. Moskowitz says, I can't be mad that he killed my daughter because, look, he thinks a dog did it. And that makes the whole thing so ridiculous. Nobody would think this was an experiment on mind control. But he went on and told the police he loved young blood. He signed his letters with S, which was also Satan, which we have a lot of in the California murders where they've tested these zombies. He said, Sam commands me. I'll tell you, he says, when I take these orders, I run. That's what he said. And he tells about killing the women. He didn't want to hit the men, but he wanted to hit the women. He singled out the women and not the men. And I think that's interesting because at the time that Dr. Marcus Foster was killed in Oakland, the SLA, they wanted the black man. They didn't want the white man. His friend Mr. Blackburn was with him that he had worked with for many years. And they used cyanide bullets on the black man and regular bullets on the white man, so the white man lived. So this selective killing can be used in many, many ways, and it works quite effectively. He went each case after the woman, and he left the man. Sam was arrested on Wednesday in the Bronx, and he said that he had been out then looking for a sign to kill again. The situation would be, I would find a parking place for my car right away. And it was things like that that convinced me it was commanded. Now, there's people I know in New York City that will park their car in front of a theater or a certain section in town. If a friend is going, and there's services that'll do it for you, they're paid to do it, and then they pull away and leave a space for you when you come, and you have a place to park at night for the theater. There's no trick for getting a car to park if you want somebody to kill in that neighborhood. He said, I wanted to get a victim last week, and he waited to get a sign. I always had the perfect spot. It fell into place. Did you feel remorse for murdering 7 people? Why should I? It was commanded. Sam told me to do it. Sam told me to kill. Remember, Sam Carr is the man downstairs, not the dog. See, and he said, I got my first calling. I went to Houston, Texas, and got the gun and came home for the first shooting a month later after coming home from Houston. I got my first calling, and then I went to look for a spot. And he goes on, and as I said, says he is not sad about this because he was commanded by Sam. Well, this person changed their personality in the Army, and I think next week I'll go into some more detail on David Berkowitz and send it back to the police and to the family, particularly in New York City. We'll go into why they had to bring him in at this time, why the hoax was over, they had to end it, and we'll do more about David Berkowitz because it's a classic example of the CIA and their mind control, and like the assassinations that are taking place in this country, we'll see more and more of this in the future, so it's good to go slowly and study a lot of it as we go along. Well, the time is up. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. I'll see you next week on Dialogue Conspiracy. Keep the fire away, too. We have to keep the fire away.
I thought to myself, while driving down Route 68, the car in front is a Renault. It's not behind, it's not a Ford. There is a truth of how things happen. If it was yesterday, it wasn't 1894. And if tomorrow's gonna to come true, there'll be another truth in store. And those who think there is no truth, that all depends on point of view, will lock us up, fire the bombs made only for a gentleman to use. The president is just a choice. He should not incite or claim his fame. One November night, I heard the screaming horns. A new America had changed her name. We're not the same. You and I are not. You who call free thinkers enemies, you are clearly now the enemies. And we will do what we must do to keep it free, like I must write and she must sing and they must slave. You must have heard that we will never really rise again. The mind behind the plastic mules gave the word. They cannot just mow us down. It's they who are the arch anemic ones. Ours are free and tender girls. Ours are mountain climbing sons. So you and I would disagree. Truth exists, but misery. I cry for you, I cry for us, as I prepare to leave the bus.
behind political assassinations and abuses of power in this country. Her program relates the news of the week to political conspiracies. Dialogue Conspiracy originates with KLRB-FM in Carmel, California. And now, Mae Brussell.
This is Mae Brussell. It's Dialogue Conspiracy number 283, and it's August the 22nd, 977. I'm going to continue this week a part 2 of Son of Sam, an intriguing case. I discussed it last week on Dialogue Conspiracy, aspects of that case, and there's so much material coming in the news media that I want to continue on that subject. The reason I'm talking about Son of Sam in a two-part series, and will be referring to him many, many times in the future, is that he probably, as of this day, is the most perfect example of the CIA experiments of mind control. I have named at various times on this program maybe 30 or 40 other persons that have been under the control of the experimentation of people like Dr. Jolly West at UCLA or Dr. Jose Delgado from Yale University. But there are literally hundreds of institutions across the country that can be involved in this process now, and there are certain centers that can be pinpointed for training people to alter their minds and change their behavior, and one of those places is South Korea. I also said last week on Dialogue Conspiracy that the family of Stacy Moskowitz should sue the police department in New York City and Yonkers because their daughter was unnecessarily murdered, that the police had evidence as early as June that David Berkowitz was Son of Sam and that he had done these murders in New York, and yet the police chose not to arrest him, and it was identical to the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department having evidence that the Manson family was going to do a large massacre and protecting them from the law enforcement arrests or going into the Spahn Ranch to get them before Sharon Tate and the others in her home and Mr. and Mrs. LaBianca were killed. After I was on the program last Monday, the Tuesday newspaper across the country, the Associated Press, announced that Mr. and Mrs. Moskowitz were suing the Yonkers Police Department for $10 million. They claimed that there was negligence in the case of their daughter's death. They charged the police work with negligence, as they knew as early as April, had evidence that David Berkowitz was the Son of Sam who's doing the murders. I had pinpointed it to June, a month before the last killing, but they have proof as early as April. They said he should have been arrested, that the police had certain leads, which they didn't follow up, and if they had followed them up, their daughter would be alive today. I mentioned that I would be sending this two-part cassette to the family of Stacy Berkowitz. I also am trying to get Stacy Moskowitz. I'm also trying to get the address of the Berkowitz family and send them a copy of these programs and suggest that they have a lawsuit against the federal government for programming their son David, who signed up voluntarily to go to war and was a typist in South Korea until he became a conscientious objector and then was given the kind of LSD with these many chemicals in that altered personalities of some of the most famous or notorious of our court cases today, and he was a typical pattern, and his crime was that he became a conscientious objector and didn't want to continue holding a gun or being in the service. I called him the Son of Sam, literally meaning that he was the son of Uncle Sam, and that his referring to himself as Uncle Sam was because he was in the control of the government and couldn't break that bondage. That was last week on Dialogue Conspiracy, August the 15th. And then the Salt Lake Tribune had an article 3 days later, August 18th, more indictments likely in the Son of Sam murders. And it goes on to quote, an Army friend said that David Berkowitz adopted the name the Son of Sam because he believed that he was a pawn of the United States government, symbolized by Uncle Sam. Terry Peterson, 24, from McFarland, Wisconsin, said in an interview that they were best buddies in Korea. And when David Berkowitz complained about what the Army was doing to him over there, he took a lot of static after he filed those conscientious objector forms. I would just tell him, well, you signed up and now you're just a Son of Sam, said Peterson. What I meant was that he was a soldier for Uncle Sam and he was obligated to serve his country. But he took that to mean that he was a pawn in the tool of a big game and that the establishment was making him play it. I'm certain that's where the name Son of Sam came from. And that is from an Army buddy. They used that reference that when he wanted to get out of the Army and they wouldn't let him, he became their pawn. I'm going to give an example here on KLRB in a few minutes of a man at Fort Ord who was listening to my programs in May of 1972 and wanted to get out of the Army when Richard Nixon was heavily bombing Cambodia. And I'll read you the psychiatric reports at Fort Ord, California. And I saved this person from having psychological tests and being sent to South Carolina, and offered to help him with a court-martial when he claimed that the government was fouling over these people and lying to them and conducting wars overseas like Laos and Cambodia without the American people knowing it. And I was instrumental in stopping his testing with drugs and psychologists of the U.S. Army when he was putting up the same kind of a fuss that David Berkowitz was doing in South Korea. So I know that the government was interjecting with these people that didn't like the war, that were already in the service, and they didn't want them fragging officers. They didn't want them joining the Vietnam veterans against the war. And one of the alternatives was to turn them around psychologically and then send them home as killers and make them go against their first feelings of anti-war and perform killings in America. In my article, The SLA is the CIA, that I wrote in 1974, I talked about what Uncle Sam was doing to people inside the prisons to test them, and also to people who objected to the war, conscientious objectors. But I mentioned that the experimentation and the hypnosis programs had been going on for quite a few years in prisons and mental hospitals for 15 years. I mentioned an inmate from Vacaville Medical Facility who wrote to me through KZAP. He listened to my shows that were playing up at KZAP at the time, and he told me that employed persons at Vacaville were holding down prisoners against their wishes, while two officers by the name of Octine and Rudol, he referred to Mr. Rudol as a Gestapo, were administering double doses of some medication that were for the specific purpose of making distinct changes in their personalities. This was happening in California, and I knew about this in 1974 and wrote about it. And just August the 2nd, 1977, 3 years later, the New York Times had a full-page article on the specific intent of the CIA to alter personalities, and that Vacaville was one of the places they were doing it. I wrote in 1974 that over the past year I have accumulated evidence of mind-altering methods and how they pertain to the past political assassinations. The United States has financed psychosurgical experiments in Boston by Doctors Mark, Irvin, and Dr. Sweet, and now they are spreading around the country and also overseas in places such as South Korea. Plans exist, this was in 1974, to turn large masses of population into zombies to be used for future slave labor and also for kamikaze war troops. The prisoners became the experimental scapegoats. Dr. Jose Delgado, funded by NASA and Navy intelligence, came to the United States in 1950, and he had lived under Franco Spain's administration and helped with brain surgery and began experimenting with electrode implants to order persons to act against their own will. Dr. Delgado had perfected these electrodes quite a few years ago and was given at least $1 million by the Justice Department, Health, Education, and Welfare, Navy Intelligence, and NASA. And when you think of Son of Sam, you have to go back to the quotation, which I had in my article, which was from the congressional records of February 1974 of Dr. Delgado. And this goes back to the motives of why they tested Sam. Right now, David Berkowitz is watching the Flintstones, watching television, very happy, laughing, eating his 3 meals a day, sleeping at night like a baby, enjoying himself, not aware of any of the trauma he's been into, and yet saying that he is under the control of these people, various people, and names them. And this motive for testing people like the Son of Sam was stated in the congressional record. This is what Dr. Delgado said, and I think it's worth repeating every few months on the air so that you understand the motive behind this. He said, "We need a program of psychosurgery for the political control of our society. The purpose is the physical control of the mind. Everyone who deviates from the given norm can be surgically mutilated. The individual may think that the most important reality is his own existence, but that is only his personal point of view that lacks historical perspective. Man does not have the right to develop his own mind. This kind of liberal orientation has great appeal. We must electrically control the brain so that someday armies and generals will be controlled by electric stimulation of the brain. That's Dr. Delgado, who came here from Spain and has been working on these techniques and heavily funded by the federal government. I also mentioned in the article that the van that was purchased, a fictitious name for the SLA when they went from San Francisco to Los Angeles for the shootout, was under the name of Ricky Delgado, and wondered if it was dedicated to the man who wanted to destroy minds, and then eventually, a few weeks later, they destroyed their flesh. Well, there's a man who lived one floor below David Berkowitz in New York City by the name of Craig Glassman. He belongs to the Westchester County Sheriff's Deputy Department. He lived on the 6th floor, same window right down below, and this is the note that was pinned to his door, slipped under the door by David Berkowitz shortly before he was arrested. He said, "Craig, you will be punished. How dare you force me into the night to do your bidding? True, I am the killer, but Craig, the killings are your commands. The streets have been filled with blood, Mr. Glassman, at your request." They asked David Berkowitz why he targeted Mr. Glassman for these messages, and he said that he was under the control of this man. They asked Mr. Glassman, the sheriff, why Mr. David, the son of Sam, believed that he was manipulating him, and his reason was, "I just happened to move in beneath him. He probably saw me in my uniform." Now here is a sheriff from the New York area, from Westchester, the county right next to where the killings took place. And David Berkowitz is one of the most notorious criminals in the New York City that had 9 million people terrorized for one entire year. So it's hardly likely that he'd be sending letters to a sheriff. He would be very silent, or maybe he'd change his apartment if a law enforcement man moved in right under him and he knew he was a sheriff. It seems that he would change his location, because if a murder took place and they saw him coming in late at night, they would know that he wouldn't have a cover for being in that night. The logic that the sheriff there got letters because this killer saw him doesn't make sense. Craig also sent letters to the Yonkers Police Department telling about his killings and bragging about his killings and scaring them. And it's at the Yonkers Police Department where Mr. Sam Carr's daughter was a full-time dispatcher. Sam Carr is the man that lived downstairs in a house next to the apartment, 7 floors below, who had the dog that the son of Sam said was bothering him and that he had shot. And by calling attention to himself to a man whose daughter is the full-time dispatcher for the Yonkers police, where all information would come in about son of Sam, or to antagonize or burn the door of the man below him, doesn't make any sense at all. The police department was around him everywhere, and he was in direct contact or antagonizing these families, and nobody had fingered him. The motive for these processes, the kinds of terrors that are taking place in this country, number one, are to spread terror, and it keeps people off guard. Number two, it's good for election years. Mayor Beam in New York is literally beaming. There's an article about how the capture of son of Sam helped him. He jumped right in and gave accolades to the police, even though many murders had taken place and people had been blinded and permanently crippled by this. Mayor Beam came in a year later and was proud of his men. It also tests kamikaze troops. That's the stated purpose of the CIA for some of their experiments, to get people who are willing to die. The Chowchilla defendant Frederick Woods had said, "If you arrest me, I'm going to die," and David Berkowitz said, "I'm going to die." They haven't killed themselves, but they are testing these people to do murders and take chances because they can be used as future armies. There also were a lot of anti-Semitic reasons for using David Berkowitz, and it was done for the same reasons that Jack Ruby was used to kill Harvey Oswald, or Bernard Weissman was used to put his name on the ad the day that John Kennedy was killed. And we'll go into that more, the political overtones of that. But every July, TV gets pretty dull. The summers are an exciting time for crime in America. The mass media plays it up, and I believe it's synchronized. And if you don't believe it, mark your calendar for next July and August 1978 and wait for the next media events. We're running out of motion pictures such as Jaws and The Towering Inferno and Roller Coaster, Airport, The Exorcist, and Earthquake. Now you have TV movies on the John Kennedy assassination coming up by Lawrence Schiller, on the Martin Luther King assassination, the Chowchilla story, the Gary Gilmore story, the Son of Sam movie. We've had the Boston Strangler, In Cold Blood. The SLA sequels are coming up on TV. The movie The Manson Family got a lot of play. And yet every single one of these media events is unsolved as of today and could be solved. The Los Angeles Times had an article yesterday, August the 21st. It says, the Sam Circus ending its long run on the streets of New York. The man, they say, the son of Sam, watches reruns of the Flintstones, but he had a lot more interest. It says, this circus went on. It sold millions of newspapers. It occupied hours of airtime during the dog days of summer, when much of the city normally operates at half speed, and it goes into the thousands and thousands of dollars of contracts and money made. Headline articles, How I Became a Mass Killer by David Berkowitz, offering $500 for a certain letter, $15,000 for other Army documents of David Berkowitz, and hundreds of thousands of dollars for tapes made immediately after he was arrested by a man who has still not explained how he got into the jail. And this has become a big business. It's important to know that. Also, the police department was very careful, even though the Yonkers Police Department was in on the story and could have made the arrest. The Los Angeles Times goes into the fact that the New York Police Department announced 25 promotions for the officers who worked on the Son of Sam case. The Deputy Inspector Dowd was promoted 2 grades to Deputy Chief. His top assistant, Captain Joseph Borelli, was promoted to Deputy Inspector. Joe Strana was promoted from Detective 3rd grade to Detective 2nd grade. Edward Ziga went from 2nd grade to the 1st grade. The two police officers who wrote the ticket for David Berkowitz were promoted to Detective 3rd grade. And the Yonkers police officers who actually broke the case and had the information were invited to the promotion ceremonies. They received a commendation certificate from Mayor Beam. They were very bitter, they said, because they were the ones who made the break in the story. And the Los Angeles Times goes on to say that the New York Police Department wouldn't possibly let the Yonkers cops win or take credit for the case. They said the 2 Yonkers cops who worked in the case, who passed the information on to Berkowitz to the New York Police Intelligence, were not notified even of the impending arrest. The New York police had worked in this case, and they wanted to bring in the most notorious criminal, and they didn't want to take a chance allowing a modest suburban police department to share the big place of the limelight. It was worse than that. They didn't want to take a chance that somebody else would bring in the Son of Sam, but they wanted to make sure that all these promotions were in line, and the whole team, many, many of them were promoted. I said last week on Dialogue Conspiracy that it was time for the police to close in on this case. They could have done it, I said June, the family has evidence in April, but they couldn't wait for that big massacre, that big last-minute brahu that he was going to do at the discotheque, because evidently the links of the Son of Sam to police negligence would be just too overwhelming. Again, the links to the Manson family, the military, if exposed, would cause a lot of consternation. It had to be the Sheriff Peter Pitchess who picked them up, released them even after Sharon Tate had been killed, and sent them out to the Barker Ranch, away from the Spahn Ranch. The police have a way of ending the capture if the time is due, just like they had a way to bring in Patty Hearst. When other law enforcement agencies or other persons get in on the case, then the large police department who's behind it in the first place has to bring in the suspect, because the capture is as dramatic and as important to the police psychology as the crimes themselves. The big story was that the traffic ticket in front of the fire hydrant broke the case, but there were other reasons to believe that the case would be broken. And one reason they couldn't allow the Yonkers police or private individuals to bring it in was that the mafia were going in for the Son of Sam, just like the Mafia under Mickey Cohn, were going in to find Patty Hearst. The New York Post said that a powerful Mafia chief, Carmine Galante, said that his people within organized crime would find the killer, that he was outraged by the death of Stacy Moskowitz, and he would send in the Mafia. And when the Mafia finds the killers and the police don't find the killers, that's not very good for the New York Police Department, nor would they get their large promotions. Private vigilantes were being formed in New York to take care of the matter because the police had been negligent, and now the documentation proves that they were negligent. And just like J.J. Arms, a private detective, said that he could find Patty Hearst for $100,000 and was getting ready to find her within 3 weeks, and Mickey Cohn of the Mafia was to find her. Then Charlie Bates of the FBI had to make the grand sweep and bring her in, even though he stood on national television the day that Patty Hearst was found and said that he didn't know how they located her. And I believe that they knew all along where she was, and the hoax was over. The whole SLA story terminated, or part of it terminated, when Patty Hearst was brought in on that day, because they couldn't allow her to get in the hands of some small jail where she wouldn't be tapped or bugged, where her messages wouldn't be taken and published and sold, and they had to be sure that they had the place to put her in and the proper people to set the propaganda mill going a little further about Patty Hearst and what she had to say to her friends. The actual capture of Son of Sam, or the story of Son of Sam, hinges upon 5 different sources of information, which will not be put in the Meredith book, the publishers, that's coming out. The first is Mrs. Cecilia Davis. She was an Austrian-born woman who got citizenship in 1957 in the United States, who lived 1 block from where Stacy Moskowitz was killed. She's the woman who looked eye to eye to David Berkowitz the night of the killing and saw him carrying a package, and claims that she didn't tell the police or anybody for days. And she is the one who said she saw the cop put a ticket on the car. The real role about Mrs. Cecilia Davis and how she came to this country, or what she does, is very important to the capture story. The next important subject is Craig Glassman, the sheriff that lived below David Berkowitz. And the third one is Sam Carr, the gentleman who had the American flag flying 7 stories below David Berkowitz, who had the dog. And Sam Carr's daughter, as I said, was a dispatcher at the Yonkers Police Department. It would be interesting to know the relationship of Sam Carr to the person who rented a room up in New Rochelle to David Berkowitz before he moved to Yonkers. These people corresponded with each other. They got to know each other. They had informed the police department about the situation, and their relationship to this particular victim is as important as the relationship of Lee Harvey Oswald to the rooming house where he stayed at Earlene Roberts, or his rented rooms at the YMCA, and his locations at the home of Ruth Payne in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The housing of these agents is important to the story. Also, the Army friend of David Berkowitz in Houston, Texas, that supplied the gun for the fatal shootings, he went all the way to Texas, met an Army buddy who gave him the guns, and he said then he came home until 1 month later when he received his orders to kill. Also, the psychiatric records from the Army would tell the whole story. When he wasn't court-martialed, then what did they decide to do with him? And under the Freedom of Information of the Decency Act, the Army says we won't release profiles or stories of these defendants' Army records or psychological reports. Yet, instead of giving the exact reports of this person, they don't show any shame or embarrassment to make psychological profiles that have no basis in fact, or have photographs of the room with evidence that could be as planted as Arthur Bremer's apartment with Bob Dylan records on the floor and dirty writings on the wall like the SLA left their apartment in San Francisco, and pornographic literature, Arthur Bremer's apartment again, and tried to smear the left, and not that the left uses the pornography, but the Dylan records left there is like the Angela Davis books left at the apartment of Arthur Bremer, and of course the notorious diaries in all these cases. But the real story of Son of Sam will come in the background of Mrs. Cecilia Davis, Craig Glassman, Sam Carr, the friend from Houston who supplied the gun, and the actual Army records. But instead of that, we get this barrage of propaganda that comes out over the media, newspapers, and will be in movies and books for a long, long time to come. Mr. Berkowitz, as I say, rented a room in New Rochelle. He moved out of it after 2.5 months, and he complained about a dog at the house. He went on to be an auxiliary policeman with the New York Police Department, then worked for the federal government in the Post Office Department. He lived one story above Craig Glassman, who was an auxiliary deputy sheriff, and he passed daily or had contact with Sam, who he said was also programming him, whose daughter was the full-time police dispatcher for any information coming over about Son of Sam to the Yonkers Police Department. For a man who was doing these killings and who was so notorious in hiding himself from everybody, he was sending letters that were in the hands of police agents and police persons, and sending his handwriting to Mr. Breslin, the newspaper man on the sheriff's department, neighbors, an old landlady who had the room, this one house, Jana and Jack Cassara, writing them crazy, threatening letters, and writing Sam Carr letters, all of them identifying them with this crazy killer, and yet he's in the midst and in the arms of police and government agents all around. It's interesting, at the time he was captured, after leaving all these letters around, and I mentioned this last week, that when the time to bring him in is due, and the New York police are going to make this great entry and get all their promotions, all they had to do was to go to his car, which is parked downstairs, and he's 7 floors upstairs, and find a .45 caliber submachine gun and a 4-page letter that positively identifies him to all the other killings, which he easily could have taken with him. And then he walks out of the apartment carrying his .44 caliber pistol, and the case, for all purposes, then is supposed to be closed. It's very strange, all the letters he was writing and all the people linked to the police departments. As I say, the most obvious case of mind control that I've seen so far is the story of this David Berkowitz. Donald DeFries was a victim of this. Joseph Romero of the SLA, who went to Vietnam and came home and had the same kind of a treatment, was a victim of the LSD government mind control program. And also, I've referred to a book called The Smith Conspiracy, which is an interesting book. I don't have the name of the author. I couldn't find it on my shelf today. It must be moved around, but you can look it up in a bookstore or library. It's called The Smith Conspiracy. It's about a man who was in Vietnam and objected to the anti-war protesters at home and the people that didn't go along with the war. And they showed him pictures of these protesters. They also had him experience several of his friends blown up in the war movement. So this person was taken into a mind experiment program, and he came home and was married, and his wife knew that his personality was changing, and he was under hypnosis. And she went to his doctor, but the doctor also worked for the CIA, for the government, and the point was that they were going to kill a black leader at Hunter's Point and shoot him, and they were programming this man for kamikaze killing. But the way they tested him was to take him to an animal shelter and take out a dog and kill the dog and test him on killing the dog. And in this case, David Berkowitz was at the animal shelter at New Rochelle or Westchester County with another person. He was in the company of another person. He wasn't alone. He complained of a dog in a room that he rented from this one party. He shot the dog of Sam Carr down below, and dogs figured in part of the mind control, triggered something off in the program for his mind. Now, there were things that he said besides the fact that he charged Craig Glassman with sending him out on the streets to kill. As soon as he was arrested, you've seen these quotations, "I was out to kill, it was my job. Sam told me to do it. Sam sent me on the assignments. I had to do what I had to do. I had to take orders. I got orders through Sam Carr's dog," which sounds a little ridiculous, until you believe or can understand that there is a possibility that with electrode implants he could hear the dog bark and it could trigger him off. Because Sam Carr lived 7 floors below in a house around the corner, and David Berkowitz was on the 7th floor, there wouldn't be any reason for a man in Yonkers living up in a building on the 7th floor to even worry about a neighbor's dog. He couldn't even see that dog, and he wouldn't even have to pass it. When he went to work at the post office, all he had to do was to go around another corner, and he wouldn't know Sam Carr had a dog unless he was electronically controlled with an electrode implant and the dog barked because there was no reason in the world for David Berkowitz to even see the dog. If he were in an apartment building with him, it would be different. But the same man whose daughter was a police dispatcher at Yonkers, where all this was taking place, lived 7 floors down in a house around the corner, so he couldn't even hear that dog from his apartment or even know the man had a dog, or no reason to shoot that dog unless he had the electrode implant so that he was told to do it, such as Lawrence Kwong in San Francisco, who went to a detective 20 times and said, I kept hearing KGO, and he had been in hospitals and had the entire profile of somebody with electrode implants, and then finally went to the window and made an attempt to kill Jim Dunbar, then went around and killed Ben Munson, went around the front of the building. And he kept hearing KGO, and there'd be no reason for Lawrence Kwong to hear anything any more than David Berkowitz, except that Sam Carr's dog could have had the sounds upstairs on the 7th floor. He said that he's commanded by this party who lives way downstairs. He said, I didn't want to kill men. I wanted to kill women. He was out to kill them. And he said he would drive around until he got a sign or instructions of when to kill. And when he got the sign and everything was right, he says, I was told what to do. They told me to kill. When I got the sign, then I would kill. Do you show remorse for killing 7 innocent people? No, why should I? He said, I was commanded. And that is consistent with getting orders. As I say, Joseph Romero of SLA was in Vietnam. He was a member of the 101st Airborne Division. He signed up for duty twice and came home. He was originally a pacifist and then became a killer and killed Dr. Marcus Foster, the head of the Oakland School, the superintendent of the Oakland School Board. The white man lived who was shot, and Dr. Foster was killed. Joseph Romero said he began to take a lot of drugs. He couldn't get out of his house without completely being drugged out of his head. Joseph Romero is now at San Quentin Prison working with the White Aryan Brotherhood, consistent with the Nazi threats that they would kill this school leader, Dr. Marcus Foster. The mystery of these murders is never solved. The problem is always open. The motives are unclear. The New York Daily News, the New York Times, Washington Post say the problem is solved, but the questions still remain. The questions will still remain until we go into the Army programs. David Berkowitz enlisted in the Army, and by 1974 he had a total personality change. He said, I went through a vast transformation. It had to do with acid and the LSD test. He also wrote letters saying, I want to be a conscientious objector. I don't want to be in the Army. He wrote a letter saying that he was renouncing his religion of being a Jew. He was going to become a Baptist. But he said, wrote letters, blessed are the peacemakers, for they are the children of God. He said, drugs and a decision not to carry a gun in the Army turned an unnoticed youth to a militant dove. The only thing on my mind, he said, is drugs and music and pollution and poverty and peace and love. I can't wait till tomorrow. He said, I want to escape this lousy life. And he had an obsession while in Korea against war and gun. He objected to being taught to fight. He said, they taught me to fight. They taught me weapons, demolition, riot control, and self-defense when he actually went over as a typist. And he sent letters on how he hated the Army, and he thought he was going to be court-martialed. And he had an aversion to the entire war system, but instead of court-martialing him, they didn't do that to him. They sent him to the psychological area, the Army psychiatrist, and did a job on them. There's one letter that he wrote about his love for people, how he loved people, and he said, I want to get out of this. I want to make love to the world. I love people. I don't belong to the earth. And he said that he got orders to kill, and he didn't want to because he said, I love people. And that goes to what happened out here at Fort Ord in, as I say, in 1972. We're talking about David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, who was in South Korea 1972 to 73. And I want to tell you about this particular person who was in the Army. His name was Kenneth Armstrong. And on May the 9th, 1972, he was teaching individual tactical training. This is from an Army report from the Pentagon, out at Fort Ord, and he was teaching how to murder and kill when President Nixon escalated the Asian War. He put down his pencil and his instructions and said, do you know what happened last night? President Nixon's decision to blockade North Vietnam was wrong. That's why we're having rioting in this country, in Berkeley, in Colorado, the Bank of America, Pacific Grove. I'm not going to give this class today because I don't believe in killing. If I'm sent back to Vietnam, I won't go. If I go, I won't fight. I will never take a life, even in self-defense. He said the Associated Press, the United Press are controlled by the government. They put out only news that the government wants put out. They don't put out correct information. The Army is supposed to be the best informed in the world, but it's not true. He said, I listen to Earth News and Zodiac News, and there's a woman, he referred to Mae Brussell, a radio personality who has a program at 4 o'clock on Saturdays. We used to be on Saturdays. I met and spoke with her, and she talks about the Kennedy assassinations and about opening the archives and about Lee Harvey Oswald being an agent. And he went on to say that he didn't want to serve the Army anymore. Fort Ord wrote up a report. He no longer enjoys his work in the service. He feels isolated, and the reason he's compelled to beat his wife, they began beating his wife, which was an untrue story, is that he's disturbed, misinformed, easily led, and basically a passive person. He conversed with me, this is the Army officer, that the government is corrupt because it does not represent the people. The people do not want war. President Nixon is making the war, and the war continues and is morally wrong. Sergeant Armstrong does not have a security clearance, but he has been banned now from further instruction of trainees at Fort Ord, and I recommend psychiatric counseling to assist with his living in peace with himself and the world as he perceives it. It is affecting his job and his family. He was married and had 2 little children, and his emotional security. If he cannot resolve his inner conflicts, I recommend whatever action is deemed appropriate to assure the Army an honest day's work commensurate to the rank he occupies and the pay he's receiving. Signed, Don Markham, Major Infantry, Chief Combat Division. And they ordered him for psychological mental hygiene consultation at Fort Ord, and they were going to ship him out of the state, and they said, let's go into his early home life, his feelings, his relationships with his wife, and the most admired male in his early life, and find out who he liked. Well, I advised Mr. Armstrong that I would represent him in the court-martial and bring the facts to the case, so they dropped the court-martial, just like David Berkowitz was going to be court-martialed in South Korea. They then wanted to send him out of the state, and they called him to the psychiatrist. I gave him my tape cassette and told him to take down everything he says to the Army psychiatrist, because they'll write a profile on him like they did on Lee Harvey Oswald or David Berkowitz to make him look crazy because he objected to this insane war that was going on in Southeast Asia. He took the tape cassette there, and the officers at Fort Ord, the mental health, said, don't you trust me? Are you paranoid? He said, don't put it down in the records. I'm paranoid. He said, I don't know you, and you don't know me, and I want to make sure that what you write is what I said. And I have tape collection in my tape collection. I have the recordings that he took with the Army psychologist, and they said, well, you can leave, come back next week. And they put him in a room where the tape recorder couldn't be attached, where there was no electricity. They put him out in a shed where there was no electricity, and then wouldn't let him record the conversation with the Army psychiatrist, and wanted to send him, I think it's South Carolina. I have the name of the state and further papers at home in my files. They wanted to send him for special psychological training out of the state. And we objected, and I came to his assistance at the time and said that they would do a mind control job on them. And this was in 1972, and I'd been on Dialogue Conspiracy a year. I started in May of 1971, and I had built up an audience at Fort Ord of people that, this is 1977, that was 5 years ago, that were aware of these mind jobs that were happening. And if I knew David Berkowitz, if he were out here at Fort Ord, maybe we could have prevented those 6 murders in New York and that slaughter of this programmed zombie. I've been studying this a long time, and that's why I wanted to do a 2-part show on Son of Sam, because I understand what the Army was doing. I was right in the middle of it, just like I objected and strenuously put up a battle to save the mind of Robert Hyde at Vacaville when he was going to go psychosurgery because he knew too much about the John Kennedy assassination and the Robert Kennedy assassination. And this was one of my prouder moments in terms of being practical in terms of the research. A lot of people say, why are you doing this work? What is the purpose? What are your goals? And some of these individual relationships I've had with men in prison or the men in the Army, where I've tangled the powers that be, such as the Presidio trial out at Fort Ord at the time the men were charged with treason. I got into that and was calling the White House and the Navy Department and active in that. The research can be used in a practical way where you do touch people's lives, and I was able to help this person. And what happened was they gave an honorable discharge and got him out of the Army and didn't send him away for a mind control job. And I sent a letter to Major Markham. I have a copy here. It's a six-page letter in which I stated some of these facts. I said, Major Don Markham recommends that Kenneth Armstrong be given psychiatric counseling to assist him in living with peace and himself and the world as he perceives it. Kenneth Armstrong is going to psychiatrist only as part of a routine severance as a conscientious objector. Nothing about his childhood or his parents or family or sex life or dreams or fantasies is any of your business except the nightmare that he has about the killings in Vietnam. Those were placed upon him by serving in the military and would be eliminated when his uniform is taken off. If the military is affecting his job and his family and his emotional security, I suggest that you release him from the Army. This recommendation that you take whatever action is appropriate to ensure he gives the Army an honest day's work appears to be a threat and a lack of total regard for complaints listed by Kenneth Armstrong and against his being in the service as a human being. This sounds like a master-slave order and not an intellectual analysis of a person's needs or attitudes. Sincerely, Mae Brussell. That was the conclusion of a 5-page letter to Major Markham at Fort Ord, and then this particular person was released from the military, and this has been going on for a long time. The son of Sam is Uncle Sam's baby, and there's a lot more like them, and the streets will be filled with terror and violence and killing unless we really try to solve these problems. Well, I think that's enough. Next week we'll probably conclude a little bit on Son of Sam and then go into the death of Elvis Presley and other news that's pertinent of the week. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. It's Dialogue Conspiracy, and I'll see you next week. Hope all is well. See you next week.
There is a truth, I thought to myself, we're driving down Route 68, the car in front is a Renault, it's not behind, it's not a Ford. There is a truth, how things happen. If it was yesterday, it wasn't 1894, and if tomorrow none of two comes true.